Helen Singer is from the charity Hearts Welcomes Refugees. Hello to you, Helen.
Hi, Jonathan.
A lot of my listeners, and you, I don't know whether you've heard any of the calls so far, but a lot of my listeners, of course, will say that many of these asylum seekers that are coming over, particularly on the boats, they're not asylum seekers, really. They are economic migrants who could have stayed in another European country, and yet they just want to come here for the handouts, for the free phone, for the benefits. You obviously work a lot with people that have, a lot of them come by boat. Is that true, or is that not your experience?
Well, I think nationally, I think about 70% of the asylum seekers who come here do get their leave to remain. They get recognised as refugees, so that's quite a high proportion. And it isn't illegal to claim asylum. It is a human right. And also international law doesn't mandate claiming asylum in the first safe country encountered. I know your previous caller was suggesting that's the case, but as we know, that's not the case. But we do need safe routes so people aren't coming on boats and making these perilous journeys, and faster processing, and then they won't be stuck in accommodation of whatever type.
I did say to Kev, my caller just before the news, who you obviously heard, I did say to him, had he ever spoken to any asylum seekers? No. And he admitted no. You obviously have. Just give us a flavour of the kinds of people that you have spoken to, you've worked with. What are their stories? What are their backgrounds? Why are they so desperate? Very often they are young men. Why are they so desperate to come here?
Yes, actually, we published a report recently where we interviewed 35 young men, and they talked about the trauma they'd encountered on their journey, and they were really fleeing for their lives. The report's called Forced to Flee. You can see it on our website. And they found that young male asylum seekers were really leaving because of ill treatment, fear of persecution. We've got Iranian Christians who are here because of their faith. We've had people who've been tortured. They've come through an absolute hellish experience. Their mothers have wanted them to go because they've seen other family members killed. So I think they've had incredible trauma. But we've also worked with families who are also in fear of their lives. But the hotels don't just house young men, they do also house families. We run play groups with children. In fact, one of the hotels where there are protests has got, a play group run by our volunteers, and our volunteers told us they had to put up screens so the children wouldn't be terrified of people shouting outside the hotels. I think the protests are slightly targeting the wrong people. It's not the asylum seekers' fault that they're in this accommodation, is it?
So why, if asylum seekers, if we accept that most of the people coming over are young men, why would they
not
be
saying most? Yeah.
Well, that seems to be the view that a lot of my listeners have.
Yes. Yeah.
And certainly when you look at a lot of the photographs that you will see in the press, it seems to be dinghies that are filled with, the majority are young men. Why would those young men, if they're coming from such dangerous situations, why would they have left all their family back in the dangerous situation? Why are they coming on their own?
As I said, they might have been sent by other family members because they don't want more deaths in the family. So we know mothers have sent their sons, as I just said. And if you can imagine what it would be like to be in that situation, to leave everything behind. But you might have seen family members killed. And I've spoken to families, Christian families in Pakistan, for example, who've been threatened with death by the Taliban. We speak to people like this all the time. We had a sort of picnic in the park next to a hotel on Sunday. I spoke to many, many different families. There were lots of children there as well.
But, all right,
so all had similar stories.
So let's say, for sake of argument, then you've got a young man who has been sent by his family. Go and start a new life in the UK. And then you can bring us over and save us as well. I guess that's ultimately what you're saying is the story you hear. Why, when that young man will have travelled through numerous European countries that are perfectly safe and are not experiencing war, would that person continue to try and get all the way to the UK? Why would they not have just stayed in one of those other countries?
And I think we only have a small proportion, although it seems a lot, compared to most refugees stay in the surrounding area to where they live. But it's international law, as I said, it doesn't mandate claiming asylum in the first safe country. There are lots of reasons people would come here. It wouldn't necessarily be to bring their family after they get here. I think it's just they're literally fleeing for their own lives and they've been advised to go. Or the families have just got no other option. that chances are running out of staying safe.
But what are those reasons that somebody would come all the way to the UK?
Yeah. I mean, it might be language. They might know people here already. They might have family here already. And as you said before, we do have a proud tradition of welcoming refugees. I'm the child of refugees. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the kindness of strangers. So I think sometimes the compassion and the personal stories just get left out of this sort of rhetoric that demonises asylum seekers. And I think it's quite nice to, as we work every day with asylum seekers, to sort of present the other view.
But of course, this country does have lots of problems. We all accept that.
I understand that.
There are lots of societal issues. We don't have enough housing. There's an entire generation of young people now who are struggling to be able to get their own property because property is all just too expensive. Surely you will recognise that there is a real frustration from a lot of people in this country because they look at asylum seekers and they will hear this conversation and think, what, hang on a minute. So we're now going to be providing housing for people that are not even from this country. And yet my daughter's still living at home with me because she can't afford to rent anywhere. Or my son is homeless, sleeping on the streets because he can't get his own place because the council say there are no places for young men. All these kinds of stories that people draw upon and say that it just seems unfair to help your neighbour before you've helped your own.
Yeah, I do understand. I think there's a terrible housing problem in this country, and it is a separate issue. But I understand it's a terrible problem, and we ought to be building more houses so that we can house people. I mean, in the hotels, I think there's a myth that people are living in luxury, but actually they're on £9.95 a week with no cooking facilities. It's pretty grim there, really. And people's claims are assessed using stringent criteria, just to say that. So everybody who claims asylum does have to, pass quite strict criteria. And then if they're given refugee status, for young men, they are often end up street homeless because there aren't enough houses, so they don't get priority at all. And there just isn't enough housing, and I appreciate that is a real issue.
The other thing that hasn't come up yet, and I just want to raise this with you before I say thank you for your time, is this argument that we don't necessarily know the background of many of these people that are seeking asylum. And there's a fear, and I've spoken to people before who've said they are worried about their children's safety in their local area. If there is an asylum hotel, for example, nearby, they're worried about whether an asylum seeker might pose a threat to them, their children, their wives, their daughters, etc. Do you understand that concern, and is it valid or not?
I mean, I think they're good and bad people amongst every community, aren't there? So, there might be the odd person who commits a crime, or there might be some social misunderstanding. But you can't sort of demonise everybody by saying that you think they presented a threat. I think the people we've encountered have come through such trauma. The last thing they're going to do is assault somebody else. I think, that they're more in fear of the protesters, really. And as I said about these poor children who are having to be shielded from the protesters outside the hotel, you think, what about them? They need protecting too. So I don't see. I think housing a lot of young men together is probably not ideal. I think it's better to have a sort of more of a mixed community or environment people house together with families. But I think things can get whipped up very easily, and we know where that leads. And,
okay. All right. Helen, really interesting. Thank you so much for your time. Helen Singers from the charity Hearts Welcomes Refugees.